I'm Dave Corrigan. I'm curator of the Museum of Connecticut History here at the State Library. I was born in New Haven and lived there until 1960 when my parents bought a little Cape Cod house out in Hamden. And my father was a teacher in the New Haven school system. And what he would do to plan a summer vacation would be buy savings bonds during the year, create a little, like a vacation account. And he'd cash the bonds in, and we'd take a trip. We'd go on vacation to, a couple of times we went up to Vermont near right on Lake Champlain, and we'd go to Cape Cod, up in the Eastham area. He had been a baseball player at Holy Cross in the 30s, and he played in the Cape Cod Baseball League. And he had a lot of friends up in the area that we'd always visit when we were there, so that was kind of interesting. And very often we'd go from New Haven to Hammonasset for a day in the summer, and we would make an annual pilgrimage from New Haven to Hartford to do our Christmas shopping at G. Fox Company.
Now, what did your father teach?
Actually, when I was born, the same year I was born, he became the principal at Truman Street School over on the hill in New Haven. Mm-hmm. But he had taught science at Bassett Junior High for a while.
Did he have any particular interest? Like, did you always stop at science museums? Did you always stop at any kind of historical location? Or did he have an interest that would take you out because he was a teacher to certain places?
Not that I really recall. I mean, we'd get in the car and drive up Route 5 to Vermont or out, to the Cape. I can't remember, a lot of stops along the way, but we do have some photographs, obviously either coming or going from Vermont. We stopped at least once in Santaland in Putney, Vermont. I've got a photograph of my sister and I in front of, the white painted North Pole right in the center of the Santaland. And there's also a photograph of us in front of the statue of Massasoit in Plymouth, Mass., which is right up the hill from where the Plymouth Rock is. So that must have been a side trip when we were on the Cape. But we went to Mystic Seaport and a lot of other places, Peabody Museum, but I don't think it was necessarily a particular interest in science museums or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Hammonasset was a favorite of New Haveners, and we've heard stories in our interviews about how long it took to drive from New Haven to Hammonasset when it was just Route 1 before the interstate. So were your drives before the interstate?
Yeah, we'd go through New Haven. We lived on Norton Street between Whaley Avenue and Elm Street. So we'd head downtown and then head out to Middletown Avenue and then pick up Route 80 and then go through Killingworth and that way down to Route 1. I think it brought you out pretty close to the entrance to Hammonasset. So it was probably an hour or so.
And what would you do for the day? Would you pack a picnic basket? Would you stay for the whole day?
Basically, I would just get sunburned.
The Irish way.
The Irish way. We'd spend the day. There'd be a big picnic basket of some sort, and we had a insulated jug that we would take cold drinks in. My father would usually end up getting a couple of truck tire inner tubes, to go out in the water. And we had an umbrella. At some point, they finally bought an umbrella because, we were just getting burnt every Saturday when we go out there. My mother had this suntan oil or lotion. It was I think it was Danish. It was called Skål. And you might as well have rubbed Wesson oil on yourself. And it didn't do any good. And I remember coming home on Saturday nights, laying in bed, sunburned, and my mother would come in with some concoction that smelled of vinegar, just kind of wipe it down and try to take the sting out of it. And then, maybe a couple of occasions, I'd recover from the first sunburn, and then we'd go the next week, and start all over again. But that didn't happen very often. But there was a lot to do. I mean, there was the boardwalk at Hammonasset, and you could go up and get a drink or some ice cream. I'd always hike out to Meigs Point and go up in the rocks, and climb around in the rocks and try to find some shade. But it was fun. I mean, one of the things I remember, my father, he was an athlete in New Haven at Hill House High in the 20s, and he played football, and then after years later, he was a football official. Did local high school games and prep schools all over New England, and I guess that's another kind of a road trip story that still has to be told. But on the beach, he would have these file cards, and they would be different plays or different situations, and I'd ask him the question, and he'd have to tell me, well, what's the rule, or what would be the call that the official should make. And I mean, we did it so many times. I mean, I knew the answers by heart, and I'm sure he knew all the questions and answers. But it was just a way to kind of, get a little involvement and some bonding time on the beach. It was fun.
Now, did you and your sister ever fight about where somebody was going to sit in the car, or?
No, I sat behind my father. He was driving. My mother was sitting on the passenger side, and she sat behind her. That was
the standard.
That was it. There was no deviation from that. No.
Pat, does that sound familiar?
Laura is so specific. My little sister is so. She goes, "No, that's not your side. This has always been your side." I don't remember. She does. Wow.
So, and then what kind of snacks and picnic food would your mom pack?
Oh gosh, I don't honestly remember. Probably peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, or something that wouldn't dissolve on the beach in the pack, but nothing really specific comes to mind.
Now, when you took the longer trips, did you stay overnight, or would you drive up to Vermont in a day and come home?
Oh no, that would be for like a week. We'd rent a cabin on Lake Champlain, and we'd go in the water, go on the boats. Just it was at least for a week. The same on the Cape too.
Now, you still like the Cape for road trips. Where would you stay on the Cape when you were a kid?
It was up on Eastham, which is on the bay side. There was I remember the name, it just stands out, it's Thumpertown Road, kind of an odd name. And I've driven up there a couple of times just to see what's there, and I mean, the cabins are still there. They've all been rehabbed, but they're right on the cliff looking over the bay. And when I was a kid, there was positioned out in the bay was a U.S. Navy target ship. It was put there during World War II, and they would still use it every once in a while because Otis Air Force Base is close by, and Edwards, I think, is on the Cape also. And the first time I saw it, I said, we got to walk out there. And of course, it's probably a mile and a half or 2 miles, and at low tide, you think you can walk out. So my father said, "Yeah, sure, we can walk out there," knowing full well we're never going to get within 100 yards of it. So we walked for about a half an hour, and I said, it's not getting any closer. So he said, let's go back, But I think they finally dismantled that a couple of years ago. There was a big story in the Cape Cod Times newspaper. We were up there, but that's one of my vivid memories of being on the Cape in the summers, and then going to the Cape Baseball League, the games up there. We still do that when we go up.
And what about foods? A lot of Cape Cod has a lot of seasonal food restaurants and food shacks. What did you look forward to?
I honestly have no recollection of that.
So was your mom one of those always cook at home?
As far as I recall, yeah. I mean, the cabins always had a small kitchen or a kitchenette, with a stove and a refrigerator. And we'd make a trip down to the little supermarket, every couple of days and restock. It might have been a question of economics, for eating out. I just don't recall.
Now, normally in that area, you had to really bring a lot with you for those cottages. Do you remember what kind of things had to be packed in the car?
I can remember my father packing stuff. At some point, they bought, kind of a tubular aluminum roof rack, and I mean, the cars got bigger through the years. I don't know why they needed the extra space, but I remember that thing was up in the garage, when it wasn't used, and my father would get it out and put the bags of towels,
Yeah.
all the linens and stuff you had to take with you, and the soft-sided stuff, and then you just hope it didn't rain on the way up.
Now, speaking of cars, a lot of people have fond memories of the different car models they have, and you're kind of a car guy. Do you remember what kind of cars your parents had?
The first car I remember was a '49 Ford sedan, and after that, everything my father bought was a Buick, right up until his last car, I think, was he bought in the mid '80s. He had a big Buick Roadmaster, 1953 Roadmaster. It was gray with a white top, and it was pretty comfortable. Had a big trunk, and it had the big shelf behind the back seat, which no car has nowadays. And that was always packed with stuff.
Did you ever have the station wagons?
No.
Okay, so you had really big cars with those deep trunks.
Yeah.
A lot of fathers had a whole system about how they would pack those trunks.
He must have had it because I'm very systematic when I pack now. The place we stay, the fellow was laughing. We had on the Cape. He would always kind of sit in the window and watch me pack the car because he said it was just you knew where each little bag or box has to go to fit. And I'm sure I got that from my father, but I don't remember watching him pack the car. I mean, I might bring stuff out for him, but he did all the packing. So.
It's funny because I hear a lot of stories, and I wonder if there was that whole generation of our fathers that were in the Second War, and they really knew how to pack supplies and carry supplies and organize supplies. And so a lot of people say that their dads were just like that. You'd bring everything out and set it on the driveway. Then the father would develop the system for how it was all going in the trunk or on top of the car.
That's pretty much what we did, but my father wasn't in the service in World War II, so I don't know where he got it. But it was he was meticulous about stuff like that. But.
Now, one of the things we're going to feature in the exhibit is the cigarette lighter made in Bridgeport. You want to tell us a little bit about that cigarette lighter company?
It was made by the Casco Products Company. It originated in Bridgeport, and I believe it was the first kind of the automatic cigarette lighter where you push it in, and when it was hot enough to light your cigarette, it would pop out. So you just pull it out and light the cigarette and put it back in. Prior to that, it was they were on cables, and you'd have to kind of turn the thing on and then light it and put the thing back in. But Casco in Bridgeport came out with that, I believe, in the 30s.
Now, were those always add-ons to cars, or were they standard?
They became standard after a while, but I think when they originally came out, they were add-ons. But then the Casco cigarette lighter, publicized itself as standard equipment on every Ford, Plymouth, Chevy, pretty much every car made in Detroit, until probably the '90s when the smoking kind of declined as an acceptable habit, and now some of the space that the cigarette lighter took up is now for it's a USB port,
yeah,
or some sort of thing that or a place to plug in your phone charger.
Now, I don't remember any of the cable ones, but I remember all of the push-in Casco-type lighters.
Mm-hmm.
And I also remember, and I was smart enough not to do it, but I do know a number of people that did stick their finger in the cigarette lighter, even though their parents told them not to do that. So I won't name names. They're all well-educated people who should have known better as children. But so that company really specialized in that one feature, and because it was so ubiquitous, it was in every car model probably. They probably did really well for that time period. Yeah,
right. I think right through the beginning, probably in the 40s, probably post-war, maybe a little even earlier, right through until 90s, 80s, 90s, when the market just disappeared because people weren't smoking as much.
We also are going to be using a wonderful array of all kinds of, I would say, I would use it as just a generic term, but a thermos, which was actually a company name. But all kinds of picnic sets and thermos sets. Tell us a little bit about how you've collected those and how those, who made those in the state.
The two largest producers of those products were the American Thermos Company in Norwich and Landers Ferry and Clark Company in New Britain. The Thermos Company started at the turn of the century, around 1910, and their main claim to fame was that it'll keep something hot or it'll keep something cold. And a friend of mine once said, "How does it know?" Anyway, Thermos was around till the late 80s, early 90s, and they made an incredible array of insulated jars and jugs for your soup, for coffee, and the picnic sets. The jug that we used to take to Hammonasset was a Thermos product in the 50s. And Landers Ferry and Clark started in the 19th century in New Britain and got into the picnic and housewares, picnic supplies at the turn of the century, around the same time as Thermos started manufacturing their products. They made insulated carafes. You see them, some of the old movies, you see these very Art Deco-y kind of water pitchers and tumblers on desks and stuff, and most of those are made by Landers, Ferry, and Clark. And the picnic sets were popular, through the 50s and 60s. They went from being metal to plastic, and then I think most of them are now made overseas, of course. But
Now, we've got a thermos in the show that actually has what we used to call a glass liner.
mm-hmm.
And once again, as a child, we were told not to drop that thermos because that would shatter.
Mm-hmm.
And you could buy the replacements, but they never fit exactly right, and they usually leak. When do you think that shift from the glass liner inside the thermos to the all plastic construction happened?
I would say probably in the late 60s, 70s. I've been finding most of the items that we bought for the collection over the last 15 years on eBay, and under Thermos you can get all kinds of products, but you can still buy the liners in the glass liners. Most of them I think were from they kind of tapered off into the 60s and 70s. But I remember in school, somebody would drop their thermos, and of course you could shake it, and it sounded like a cocktail shaker with the glass bouncing around inside.
And maybe you could just tell us when the Museum of Connecticut History is open for visitors, and the types of things that are in the collection.
The museum is open Monday through Friday from 9 to 4. It's open on Saturdays from 9 to 2. We specialize in military, industrial, and political history related to Connecticut. We have the governor's portrait collection on permanent exhibit. It's about 70 portraits of former governors. And we also collect firearms, munitions, that sort of thing made in Connecticut over the years. We have a large collection of Confederate War souvenirs and firearms and uniforms. Political buttons, bumper stickers, all the sorts of things that you'd find we focus on statewide campaigns, not local elections. So from governor, lieutenant governor, comptroller, that sort of secretary of state. And we have a large collection of town medals that the various cities and towns gave to their veterans after World War I. We're adding to that. There's a few gaps in that. Other medals and badges that were given out, postcard views of World War I memorials erected around the state. So that's what we're focusing on. I'm working on creating a database now of manufacturing in Connecticut during World War I, trying to identify who the main contractors were, what they were making, how many rifles Winchester made for both the Allies before the U.S. entry into World War I, and then for the U.S. forces afterwards, that sort of thing. So it's kind of an evolving collection. It's pretty well focused, but there's a lot of different areas to collecting in military, industrial, and political history.